The phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, jolting me out of my focus. I wiped the sweat off my brow and stepped outside the makeshift clinic, where the midday sun cast long shadows over the rural village. The name on the screen made my stomach sink. Richard. I almost didn't answer. After years of dealing with my stepfather's antics, I knew calls from him rarely brought good news, but curiosity, and maybe a faint hope, got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Catherine." His tone was cheerful, far too cheerful. "Just thought you'd want to know. I've sold the mountain cabin." I froze, gripping the phone tighter. "You did what?" "Sold it," he repeated, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Don't look so shocked. It's for the greater good. Mine, obviously." He let out a smug laugh that made my blood boil. "My name is Catherine, and for as long as I can remember, Richard has been the thorn in my side. My mom married him when I was 15, and he quickly wormed his way into the family with charm and good humor. But beneath that exterior was a man who never hesitated to put his needs first. The cabin wasn't just a vacation home, it was my sanctuary, a place I'd poured years of love and care into. Nestled in the mountains, it was where I went to recharge after grueling work trips, where I hosted friends for long weekends, and where I felt most at peace. Hearing Richard talk about it like it was a pawn in his endless schemes was infuriating. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "That cabin wasn't yours to sell." "Relax," he drawled. "I've been managing things around here while you're off saving the world. And besides, what's the point of holding on to something you're never around to enjoy? It was an easy way to clear my debts. You'll thank me later." "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped, hanging up before he could say another word. I paced back and forth, trying to calm the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Richard's audacity knew no bounds, but this time he'd crossed a line. What he didn't know, and what I intended to keep to myself for now, was that the cabin wasn't entirely mine to sell. My best friend Laura was co-owner, and the legal agreement we'd set up years ago explicitly required both our signatures for any sale to go through. This wasn't over. I sat down on the edge of my cot, staring at the phone in my hand like it might burst into flames. My mind raced, replaying Richard's smug tone over and over. How could he think this was okay? Selling something so deeply personal to me, as if it were a trinket he could trade for his own benefit? The cabin wasn't just mine, it was a lifeline. It was where I spent summers as a kid, chasing fireflies and hiking with my mom before she remarried. After she passed, it became my anchor, the one thing that felt steady when everything else seemed to fall apart. Richard, of course, had no such attachment. To him, it was just another resource to exploit, like so many things he'd meddled with before. But this wasn't some small favor or inconvenience. This was my home. I tapped on Laura's name in my contacts and waited for her to pick up. "Hey, Kathy, what's up?" she said cheerfully when she answered. "Richard sold the cabin," I blurted out, unable to keep the anger from my voice. There was a long pause on her end. "He what?" "Apparently he needed the money to pay off some gambling debts," I said bitterly. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants, but I know our co-ownership agreement makes that impossible. He doesn't have the authority to sell it without your consent." Laura let out a low whistle. "He really thought he could get away with this. That man has no shame." "None," I agreed. "I'm going to need your help sorting this out. I'll finish my volunteer assignment and head back home as soon as I can. Can you pull up the legal documents in the meantime? I want to be ready to counter this when I get back." "You got it," Laura said, her voice firm. "We'll take care of this together." As I hung up, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Richard thought he'd outsmarted me, that I was too far away to do anything about his betrayal. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. I wasn't the scared teenager who used to let him steamroll me. I was an adult now, with resources, allies, and a firm grip on the law. If he thought this was over, he was about to get a rude awakening. The next few days passed in a blur as I finished up my volunteer assignment, trying to keep my emotions in check. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the thought of Richard's betrayal lingered like an unwelcome shadow. I couldn't shake the image of him gloating about settling his debts at my expense. Late one evening, I sat down with my journal, something I always brought with me on trips. Writing helped me sort through my feelings, and I needed clarity now more than ever. As I scribbled furiously, the memories started flooding back. The first time I visited the cabin with my mom, the hours I'd spent restoring it with Laura, the quiet nights by the fireplace when the world seemed to stand still. This wasn't just a building. It was a piece of me. And Richard thought he could just sell it off like a poker chip? No. Not this time. Laura called again the next day, her tone brisk and businesslike. I went through the co-ownership agreement, she said. You were right. He didn't have the authority to sell without my consent. The sale is invalid. Relief coursed through me, but it was quickly replaced by anger. Do we know who he sold it to? Not yet, Laura replied. But I pulled the county records and there's no official transfer of ownership. It sounds like he might have tried to do this under the table. That sounded exactly like Richard. Always looking for shortcuts. Always trying to outsmart the system. What's our next step? I asked. Well, we can either confront him directly, Laura said, or we can let the legal process handle it. Either way, we're in the clear. He doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd figure it out, she said warmly, but I'll always have your back. As I hung up, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I'd finish my work here, return home, and face Richard head on. I wasn't going to scream or yell. That's what he expected. No, I'd take a different approach. I'd use the one thing Richard always underestimated, my ability to think ahead. He thought he'd won. But by the time I was done, he'd realize he'd underestimated me for the last time. When I finally arrived home, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The cabin always welcomed me with a sense of peace, but now, that silence felt ominous. My houseplants were slightly wilted, the mail had piled up by the door, and the fridge was practically empty. I set my bags down and exhaled, the weight of what I needed to do settling on my shoulders. Before I could even unpack, my phone buzzed. It was Richard. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but then I thought better of it. Time to face him. Well, if it isn't my globe-trotting stepdaughter, he said, his voice dripping with fake cheer. Finally back to reality, huh? What do you want, Richard? I asked, cutting straight to the point. I just wanted to check in, he said, his tone smug. Make sure you're not too upset about the whole cabin situation. I mean, it's gone now, so there's no use crying over spilled milk. My jaw clenched. Funny you should say that, I replied, keeping my tone calm. Because as far as I can tell, it's not gone. Laura and I checked the ownership records. The sale didn't go through. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to let me know I'd struck a nerve. That's ridiculous, Richard said, his voice tightening. The buyer paid in cash and the paperwork is handled. It's a done deal. No, it's not, I said. Laura and I co-own the cabin, remember? Without her consent, the sale is invalid. Legally, it's still ours. His laugh was brittle. You think you're so smart, don't you? Always playing the perfect daughter, always trying to control everything. You don't know how hard I've had it, Catherine. I did what I had to do. You stole from me, I shot back. And you think I'm supposed to feel sorry for you? You've made your choices, Richard, and now you'll have to live with them. The conversation ended with him hanging up on me, and I was left standing there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and triumph. For years, I'd let Richard manipulate situations, guilt-trip me, and take advantage of my patience. But not anymore. I wasn't just defending the cabin. I was reclaiming my boundaries, my voice, and my peace of mind. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, reviewing the documents Laura had sent me. The co-ownership agreement was crystal clear. Neither of us could sell the cabin without the other's written consent. Richard's actions weren't just unethical, they were blatantly illegal. My thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. When I opened it, there he was, Richard, wearing his usual smug expression. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, though he didn't wait for an answer before stepping inside. I folded my arms, watching as he made himself comfortable in one of my chairs. "What do you want, Richard?" "Look, Catherine," he started, his tone dripping with condescension. "I know you're upset, but you have to understand my position. I was desperate. The people I owed money to weren't exactly patient." I raised an eyebrow. "And you thought stealing my property was the solution?" "Borrowing," he corrected, as though that made it better. "I was going to make it back. Once my luck turned around, I would have paid you back every penny." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Your luck? That's what you're betting on? Richard, you've been gambling away money for as long as I've known you, and it's never worked out. Why would this time be any different?" He shifted uncomfortably, but his bravado quickly returned. "You're overreacting. It's just a cabin. You're not even here most of the time. Why not let someone else make use of it?" "Because it's mine," I snapped. "Because it's my home. You don't get to decide what I value or what I do with my property. And for the record, Laura values it just as much as I do. Your little sale is invalid, and you know it." His face darkened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something like fear. "You wouldn't really go to the authorities, would you? You wouldn't ruin your own stepfather like that." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze. "Try me." For the first time, Richard didn't have a snappy retort. He stood up, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding. The confrontation had left me shaken, but I also felt a spark of satisfaction. Richard was starting to realize that his usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. This wasn't just about the cabin. It was about standing up to someone who had taken advantage of me for far too long. After Richard's dramatic exit, I called Laura to update her. "He showed up at my house," I said, pacing the living room. "Tried to spin some sob story about how he'd borrowed the cabin to settle his debts." Laura snorted on the other end of the line. "Borrowed? Does he even hear himself? What did you say?" "I told him the sale was invalid, and if he pushed me, I'd go to the authorities," I replied. That seemed to shake him a little, but knowing Richard, he's probably already scheming his next move. "Well, let him scheme," Laura said firmly. "We've got the law on our side. I've contacted a lawyer to help us draft a formal cease and desist letter. If he tries to involve the buyer again, we'll have a legal paper trail ready to shut it down." I nodded, her words grounding me. "Thanks, Laura. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'd figure it out," she said. "But we're in this together." Over the next few days, I focused on gathering all the evidence I could. I documented the co-ownership agreement, collected screenshots of text messages Richard had sent about the sale, and even tracked down the real estate agent who had been involved. When I contacted the agent, her voice was tense. "Look, I didn't know the full situation," she said quickly. "Richard told me he had permission to sell. If I'd known the cabin had a co-owner, I never would have touched the deal." "Well, now you do," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm not trying to drag you into this, but I need your cooperation. Can you confirm that Richard signed the paperwork alone?" "Yes," she admitted. "The buyer hasn't paid in full yet because I flagged the transaction as unusual. I can provide you with the documents if you need them." "That would be helpful," I said, jotting down her information. As I hung up, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Richard had banked on me being too passive or too distant to fight back, but he was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. That evening, Laura called with more good news. "The letter's ready," she said. "We'll send it first thing tomorrow, and if he tries to pull anything else, we'll escalate." "Perfect," I replied, a small smile creeping onto my face. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was gaining control of the situation. Richard thought he could steamroll me, but he was about to find out that I wasn't so easily defeated. The next morning, Laura and I finalized the cease and desist letter and sent it to Richard. The language was clear and unyielding. Any further attempts to claim ownership of the cabin or engage the buyer would result in legal action. I imagined his reaction when he received it, probably a mix of outrage and disbelief. For years, he'd gotten away with manipulating and intimidating people into submission. But this time, he was up against a wall he couldn't charm his way through. Later that day, the real estate agent emailed me the documentation she'd promised. Seeing Richard's signature on the fraudulent sale agreement made my stomach churn, but it also solidified my resolve. He hadn't just crossed a line, he'd bulldozed over it. That evening, I got a call from Detective Miller, a local officer Laura had contacted to help with the case. "Ms. Daniels," he began, his tone professional, "I've reviewed the documents you and Ms. Langley provided. It's clear that this sale was unauthorized. Based on the evidence, we can move forward with a formal investigation if you'd like." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want to pursue this." Detective Miller continued, "We'll start by contacting the buyer and explaining the situation. If Richard continues to interfere, we'll escalate to criminal charges for fraudulent misrepresentation." "Thank you, Detective," I said. "Please let me know if you need anything else from me." As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no turning back. The next day, Richard called. His voice was laced with anger, but there was an edge of desperation beneath it. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Catherine?" he demanded. "You're ruining everything." "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting what's mine. You did this to yourself." "You've always been so ungrateful," he sneered. "I stepped in when your mom couldn't handle things, and this is how you repay me?" I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You didn't step in, Richard. You took over. You manipulated, lied, and used people to get what you wanted. And now you're paying the price." He started to argue, but I cut him off. "This conversation is over. If you have anything else to say, take it up with my lawyer." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. Richard's days of pushing me around were over, and I was finally in control. 2 days later, Detective Miller called me with an update. "Ms. Daniels, we've spoken with the buyer, and they've agreed to halt the transaction. They were unaware of the co-ownership agreement and are willing to cooperate with any further investigation." Relief flooded through me. "That's great news. Does this mean the sale is officially void?" "Yes," he confirmed. "The cabin remains under your and Ms. Langley's ownership. However, we'll need to keep the case open to address your stepfather's fraudulent actions. Do you wish to press charges?" I hesitated for only a moment. "Yes," I said firmly. "I want him held accountable." "Understood," Detective Miller said. "We'll proceed accordingly. Thank you for your cooperation." After the call, I let out a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm returning. The cabin was safe, and Richard's schemes were unraveling. Later that afternoon, I called Laura to share the news. "The sale is officially void," I told her. "The buyer's backing out, and the cabin is ours again." "That's a huge win," Laura said, her excitement evident. "But what about Richard?" "The police are moving forward with their investigation," I explained. "He's not getting away with this." "Good," she said. "It's about time someone stood up to him." Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. For years, I'd let Richard get away with so much. His manipulations, his entitlement, his complete disregard for boundaries. But this time, I'd fought back. And it felt like a turning point not just for this situation, but for how I approached everything in my life. That evening, I went to the cabin for the first time since coming home. Stepping inside, I felt an overwhelming wave of emotion. The smell of the wood panels, the familiar creak of the floorboards. It all reminded me of why this place meant so much to me. I sat by the fireplace, letting the quiet of the mountains wash over me. This was my haven, the place where I'd built memories, celebrated milestones, and found peace in the chaos of life. And it was still mine. No thanks to Richard. For the first time, I let myself smile. I wasn't just reclaiming a property, I was reclaiming a part of myself. A week later, Detective Miller called with the final update. Ms. Daniels, I wanted to let you know that your stepfather has been formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted theft of property. He'll be required to appear in court, and based on the evidence we've gathered, the case against him is strong. Hearing those words brought a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and even a touch of sadness. Thank you for everything, Detective, I said sincerely. You handled this situation with a lot of strength, he replied. It's not easy to stand up to family, but you did the right thing. After the call, I sat quietly for a while, processing the weight of everything that had happened. Richard had been such a constant force in my life for years, albeit a toxic one, and now I was finally free from his manipulations. The next day, Laura and I met at the cabin. She'd brought a bottle of wine to celebrate, and we sat on the porch overlooking the mountains, the crisp air carrying the scent of pine and earth. To us, she said, raising her glass, and to not letting anyone push us around. I clinked my glass against hers, laughing softly. To us. As we talked, I realized how much I'd learned from this ordeal. I'd spent so much of my life avoiding conflict, trying to keep the peace, especially with Richard. But this time, I'd stood my ground, and it felt like a turning point, not just for my relationship with him, but for how I saw myself. You know, Laura said, interrupting my thoughts, this cabin has always been more than just a property. It's a symbol of everything we've built, everything we've worked for. Don't ever let anyone take that from you again. Her words hit home. The cabin wasn't just a house in the mountains. It was a reflection of my independence, my resilience, and my determination to protect what mattered most to me. Later that night, as I sat by the fireplace, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. Richard's betrayal had tested me in ways I never expected, but it had also shown me how strong I could be. The cabin was safe, my boundaries were firmly in place, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly in control of my life. In the weeks that followed, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The cabin, once a battleground for Richard's greed, became my refuge again. Each creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside, reminded me of what I'd fought to protect. I didn't hear much from Richard after the charges were filed. My mom called once, her voice hesitant. You know how he gets, Catherine, she said, her usual defense of him ringing hollow this time. I do, I replied evenly. And that's why I did what I had to do. She didn't argue. For the first time, there was no attempt to guilt me, no desperate plea for reconciliation. Just a quiet sigh before she said, I hope you find peace. I already have, I said, and I meant it. Laura and I spent the next few weekends working on small renovations to the cabin. We painted the porch, patched up the roof, and planted a few wildflowers along the edge of the property. With every nail hammered and brushstroke applied, it felt like I was reclaiming more than just the space. I was reclaiming myself. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Laura turned to me. So, what's next for you, Kathy? You've taken back the cabin, stood up to Richard? What's the next big move? I thought about her question for a moment, the answer coming to me with surprising clarity. I'm going to keep doing what I love, I said. Volunteering, traveling, living my life on my terms. But this time, I'm not letting anyone else dictate how I live it. She smiled, raising her glass. To that, as the days passed, I found myself reflecting more on everything I'd learned from this ordeal. It wasn't just about the cabin or even Richard. It was about realizing my own strength. For years, I'd let his behavior dictate how much I pushed back, how much I tolerated. But now, I knew I was capable of setting boundaries and holding them, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. The cabin stood as a symbol of that growth, a reminder that I didn't have to sacrifice my peace or my values for anyone else's comfort. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, I stood on the porch, breathing in the cool, pine-scented air. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home, not just in the cabin, but in my own life.